Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, January 31st around here, and it is my final show at GSMC. Want to thank everyone for watching, but let's finish it off with a bang. And we'll start doing a little bit of an off-season overview, a little guide to the off-season, give you guys an idea of what the schedule is going to be, what some storylines are going to watch, and when you're going to want to watch out for those to kind of unfold, and a couple of different things as we get into the off-season that is probably going to take a little bit longer than we want it to. Then we'll get into the way too early tiers for the 2025 season. I'll get my national title contenders as I see it, CFP contenders, dark horse contenders, and crazier things have happened type people, like teams to at least keep your eye out on in the 2025 season. Obviously, we'll not include every single team in here, but we'll try to get as many teams involved as possible. And then we'll do some hot takes about the 2025 offseason and season. I think one of the bigger ones is I think the freshman wide receivers take over once again in 2025, and we'll talk about some of the guys that you're going to be hearing from in that respect. Then we'll talk about the top 10 players heading into the 2025 college football season. No quarterbacks on this list. A lot of defenders on this list, especially edge rushers. So want to get into that towards the end of the show. And then to finish it off, we'll do a little bit of a weekend roundup, getting some coaching carousel news. Notre Dame has hired their new defensive coordinator, a couple of different things. And then I'll give my final words. Before I roll out of here for the final time, I'll give my final words to everyone out there that is watching. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, it'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, especially on my last show, so anyone that has any questions about this, please feel more than welcome to drop any questions you have in that super chat. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And let's talk about the offseason. It is going to be a very, very long time until we see a meaningful football again, and it's always an upsetting thing. You know, the season ends at kind of a bittersweet moment where you have this incredible game to finish things off, and then you wake up the next day and realize it's going to be a long while before I get to watch college football again. So let's give you some things to look forward to in the offseason, some different storylines, some different things to watch out for. But before we jump into all of that, I do just want to get into kind of the schedule of what the offseason is going to look like going forward and how that is going to work out for a lot of people, because there's a lot of different things that are going to happen and a lot of different areas where there might be some lulls, but there's still going to be a million different headlines coming out. And to start things off, spring camp is getting underway here pretty soon. There's going to be a couple of teams. I believe Hawaii has already started their spring practice, as crazy as that sounds, but a couple of different teams will start here pretty soon, get into practice. Definitely the winter conditioning has already started for a lot of these schools, so spring camp will start here pretty soon. Late April is when it will pretty much end. Early April, mid-April, depending on where your spring games are. And the first spring game is March 1st. It's Liberty, plays on March 1st. They're the very first. And then the first Power 5 game is going to be on April 5th by Clemson. That's going to be a really fun one to watch. And then April 12th, April 19th, those weekends are going to be absolutely insane. Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and more SEC teams play on the 19th, or on the 12th, excuse me. And then on the 19th, even more teams will kind of come into the fray. Some teams still waiting to schedule them, so we'll see what happens there. And then I think we have one by Washington, I believe, is all the way on May 5th. So they're taking a little bit of time with theirs, but at the end of the day, you'll see a ton of different stuff come out of spring practice. A lot of it is zero-sum. You know, a lot of it is the defensive line looks incredible. Well, how does the offensive line look? Is the offensive line terrible, or is the offensive line great and the defensive line is just that much better? And that will go on for a while. We won't really know exactly what's happening now. We will hear really big things, and I think one of the bigger things you're going to want to watch for in spring camp is just going to be Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, all breaking in new quarterbacks. How do those guys adapt to it? Obviously, Arch Manning with a little bit better of a foothold than those other two guys at his school, but at the end of the day, it'll be really interesting to watch what happens there. Then you have the spring portal cycle, and I think it's going to be insane. Now, I think we had a great winter portal cycle, and I think it was all over the place. I think there were some guys that were waiting just a little bit. I think there were a couple of guys that either they have new head coaches or they're in a position where they feel okay right now, but not overly confident, and they're waiting for that spring one. I think it's going to be off the walls, if I'm being totally honest. I think there's going to be a ton of different names moving all over the place, and maybe we'll have one or two huge fishes jump in, but that'll be definitely something to watch. Obviously, it was pretty crazy last year. I think it might just be a little bit crazier this year. And then, and then the silence kind of begins. We have these summer workouts that really teams aren't really allowed to be coaching their their players. It's a lot of player working out with player type of thing, and you'll find that that's a lot of times when teams win national titles. You know that the players, the quarterback that goes out there with his wide receivers and make sure they have the timing fully down, the running back that does a little bit better in pass pro because he was out there working on it during that time. So there are little things that you'll hear little murmurs from around these programs. The ones that you hear a lot of murmurs from, you got to feel pretty confident about going into 2025. And then fall camp, always a really interesting time, always one with a lot of different headlines, and I'm sure a couple of quarterback battles that are still not decided by the time we get around there. But going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold, and a lot of different things that are going to get into this. But let's get into the storylines and when you want to watch for these to unfold. And we'll start with the kind of the changing structure of college football. Now we have revenue sharing in college football and in college sports in general. We have to figure out how Title IX kind of goes into that. I don't know if that's going to happen before the 2025 season or afterwards, but regardless, you have $20.5 million to play around with now if you're an athletic department, and kind of distribute it, not necessarily as you see fit, but you get to distribute it among your teams, and it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of unfolds, how much Title IX really comes into play. Is it 50-50 down the middle with men's and women's sports? Can football get 50 and then everyone else gets 50? It'll be a very interesting thing to watch. And then you got to talk about the roster constrictions. 20 guys are going to have to find their way out of every single program out there, and you're going to have to find a way to do that in the spring. And a lot of it has already happened. A lot of guys have walked out the door because of this issue, but the reality is it's going to be a really interesting time, especially in the spring portal, when guys figure out that they don't even have a scholarship spot on their team. So it's going to be a fascinating thing, and definitely will be fascinating to watch. Overall, there's going to be a lot of changes, and we're going to walk into the 2025 season with at least a little bit better of an idea of what the why am I blanking here? Of what the player payment is going to look like going forward in college football, and it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds. It probably won't be perfect right away, if I had to imagine, but at some point we'll be able to get a good handle on this, and at least in 2025 we'll get a taste of what this is going to look like. Then we got to talk about CFP changes. This is one that I'm kind of losing hope on as we go a little bit deeper. It sounds like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to meet on February 19th to talk about the future. Frankly, I think they're talking about a lot of different stuff other than the CFP for 2025. Maybe they're talking about it for 2026. They could be talking about some bigger things, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, the two changes that I could realistically see happening but still would be relatively surprised by is we could get reseeding. I think that's a realistic thing that would not take a lot of, red tape or anything to get through. That's something that I think could be introduced. And then another one is teams being able to pick which quarterfinal bowl they play in, which is an interesting thing that would take a little bit of logistics and would definitely take some planning from all those different bowl games, but I think would at least have a little bit of benefit to getting that bye week and then being able to say, Oregon plays. They might have picked Pasadena anyway, if I'm being totally honest. But a couple of these teams being able to pick the one that gives them the best home field advantage just makes sense to me in the grand scheme of things. And we'll give that bye week just a little bit more of a juice than it has right now, for sure. Then we got to watch out for this. And this is kind of where I think when we have those summer workouts, when we have kind of that blank area where we don't know what to do with ourselves, we're all watching baseball and the NBA finals and all of that type of stuff. This is where you're going to want to look out for this type of stuff. And I don't know how quickly this is going to happen. I really do think it's going to take quite some time for them to really get this ironed out and really get into a position where they feel confident bringing down whatever punishment it is. And we talked about this yesterday. I don't think the NCAA is going to do much because I don't think they can do much. I think they understand that if they come down with an iron fist on Michigan, the Big Ten and the SEC are talking tomorrow along with all of the other TV networks and saying, let's just go play our own thing. Let's go take our ball and play elsewhere, and that's the last thing the NCAA wants. So I think they're going to get a little bit of a financial penalty. They might get a couple of little things around that, but the reality is the NCAA is not at a place where it can punish these big-time programs anymore and not expect them to pack their bags and go elsewhere. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. It's definitely something that is really going to affect the future of college football, and weirdly enough, you got to just hope the NCAA goes a little bit easy. And I hate to say it because I do think there are certain things that Michigan should get punished for, but the reality is, if they get punished aggressively, Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey are making plans tomorrow about where they want to go and how they want to set up their structure going forward. So that's something to think about. Definitely will be an interesting saga, and definitely one that I think Michigan's going to win one way or the other, depending on however it goes. then this one's going to happen on the field. So this one you're not going to necessarily see unfold during the offseason. Maybe you'll see some things that kind of ignite that flame just a little bit more among the fan bases, but at the end of the day, Big Ten versus the SEC, that's going to be incredible to watch. We get Ohio State, Texas to start the season. We'll get a ton of more showdowns to finish it, and we'll get to my hot takes later. I have one at the very end of the season that I think is going to be special between these two. So I think that's going to be a battle the entirety of the year, and really through the offseason as well. You know, the college football fans never sleep, and they absolutely will push that narrative, but it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold, and once they get on the field, it's the battle for the supremacy in the sport that the Big Ten has right now, the SEC had for a very long time, and badly wants to get back. And then we got to talk about this. This is the not-so-fun debate. This is the Big Ten SEC. I very much enjoy talking about that one. This one, not so much, because the SEC and the Big Ten are meeting on February 19th to discuss the future of the sport. And the reality is, whenever that happens, it tends to make me believe they're talking about the future of the sport with them, not necessarily the future of the sport with the ACC and the Big 12 and any of the Group of 5 conferences. So you got to just hope. You got to just cross your fingers and hope that these guys get in the room and they say, you know what, let's do what's best for the sport, not what's best for our conferences right now. Let's do our best to create a new governing system in the college football world, but bring the ACC and bring the Big 12 and do your best to at least play in the same realm as the Group of 5. Maybe not play for the same championship, which we've talked about before, but definitely play at least for in the same sport at the end of the day. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think all of us understand that the Big Ten and the SEC are circling a little bit of a change from the NCAA, and if they have to do it by themselves, they're more than happy to do that. But obviously, we very much want them to keep the ACC, keep the Big 12 in the picture, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops over this offseason, especially after those February 19th meetings. And then we got the countdown to kickoff. 204 days until week 0, 211 days until week 1, and those two teams face off right there, and it's going to be incredible to watch. Settle in. It's going to be a long offseason. It's always very, very frustrating. It's always worth it. When that first game kicks off, when you get to feel college football again, and when you get all the little tidbits throughout the offseason that get you a little bit more excited about your team than maybe you should be, but at the end of the day, that's what this season's about. It's about enjoying everything and getting yourself a little bit delusional about your teams at certain times. So it's going to be a weird offseason. There's going to be a lot of movement around the outskirts of this sport that are going to mess with a lot of different things within this sport. So the portal is going to be absolutely crazy. I think spring games are going to be really fun. I do think there's going to be a lot of infighting between the two conferences, and especially the Big Ten SEC versus the big ACC and Big 12. It's going to be fascinating to watch all that unfold, and there could be some big dominoes that fall this year that end up being kind of the ones that put off the future of college football and get you started on what it's going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, and that'll be a fascinating thing to watch. There's a lot of different proposals on the table, and you just got to hope that the best one wins out, and the one that cares about the sport and tries to make the sport as healthy as possible wins out, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But overall, it's going to be a long offseason. Enjoy it all. Watch every little bit that you can. Watch all the spring games. Enjoy all of that stuff. And then it will be back in time. I can almost promise you that. And it'll be back. And it'll be incredible as well. So don't worry about that. College football will live on. And we'll just have to tread water just a little bit until that happens. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we'll get to my way too early 2025 tiers. So who are my national title contenders as of right now? Who are my CFP contenders? Some dark horse candidates. Some teams that you might just want to keep your eye out on as we go throughout the season, and a couple more right after this, so stick with us.